We're back with another video, guys, and this one's going to be another tech-based video. In this video, the concept we're going to go over is another networking concept. We're going over the difference between DHCP or dynamic IPs versus static IPs. So assuming I choose to upload the video going over the DNS, the domain naming system, this will be kind of a quick recap. So DNS basically functions as the phone book of the internet, which translates IP addresses to the regular domain names or website names that we know them as. So for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and the like, all of those websites and every website you can think of has an IP address attached to it. We just don't see it. And part of that is not only for security reasons on their side, but also because we as people just aren't gonna remember IP addresses. The same way we're not gonna remember every phone number that we want or need to use, you know, for personal or professional reasons. That's why our cell phones have kind of taken that away from us, so that outside of your moms, your G-moms, your sisters, siblings, you know, father, just anyone important in your life, your significant other, aside from their numbers, of you making a point to actually memorize their numbers, you're not gonna memorize pretty much anyone else's numbers. Especially these days when people work multiple jobs, they're stacking school and work and maybe even parenting on top of each other, and they have multiple key people in their lives that they have to stay in touch with. All that stuff, right? It's just not feasible to try to memorize every phone number for every person, the same way it's just not feasible to try to remember every IP address for every website. So the same way DNS attaches a website name to the IP address to make things easier for us to remember, the literal cell phone, like the phone book and all that stuff, will attach people's names, or we can attach people's names to their phone numbers, which makes it easier for us to stay in contact. Now, when I went over the DNS video, what I didn't touch on were different types of IPs. And this can go a few different ways, but like I said, in this video, we're gonna be focusing on dynamic IPs versus static IPs. Now, the name is pretty obvious in itself, but we're gonna dive into this just a little bit because mainly on the dynamic side of things, there is a little chunk of extra information. So stick around for that if you're interested. So first off, we'll start off with the easy one. Static IPs, or static IP addresses. We just call IP addresses IPs. You know, when you get into this line of work, you just call them IPs. Static IPs are IP addresses that don't change. That's pretty simple. I don't know if you guys, when you were elementary or middle school and you had a teacher that was trying to tell you when something was dynamic versus something was static. You know, static is literally like a lightning bolt. You know what I mean? Like, not literally, but every lightning bolt looks fundamentally the same. Like, the exact pattern won't be the same, but it looks fundamentally the same. You know, like when you think of lightning, you think of probably the same general thing in real life, anime, whatever case is. You know, it's pretty uniform. But when you think of dynamic, like the example that I had when the example that our teachers used with us growing up was like dynamite, which was another way to remember it, because dynamic, dynamite, which changed, because you have dynamite, like sticks of dynamite, TNT from Looney Tunes and back in those days, and then it would change and go boom, you know? In order for that effect to happen, that boom to happen, the sticks of dynamite had to change into the blast. Versus lightning is just lightning, like it's just there, it just happens, it just strikes, you know? You see it more times than not, but usually don't have to, you don't see a process change, you know what I mean? So that's the main difference between dynamic and static IPs. Static, it just doesn't change. What you can do with a static IP is, and this usually happens more with jobs, like professional reasons. This usually doesn't need to happen in your personal life, but in professional reasons, like with my job, sometimes what customers will do is they will give a designated IP address to a device in their network that they use for whatever reason, and they'll give it an IP address that's static, meaning it will never change. Because if it changes, it might mess up their operations. It might slow things down. You know, people might get in trouble, or they can't fulfill certain customer requests as quickly, stuff like that. So it's easier for them to create an IP address or to use an IP address that will never change for that printer, for that laptop, you know, for that fax machine, you know, if they still use them, stuff like that. It just makes it easier for the IP address to never change. When an IP address changes, it can change under a few different circumstances, or main circumstances. There are two that I want to cover. One, when you change location. So if you're at home and your phone, laptop, whatever is connected to your personal Wi-Fi and you never disconnect it, chances are your IP address is not gonna change. You know, if you wake up at 8 in the morning, you never stepped outside your house because you work remote and you just don't go outside like that, and you go back to sleep at midnight later on that day, if you checked your IP address first thing in the morning and then you checked it right before you go to sleep, chances are the IP address didn't change because you didn't change anywhere. You didn't change location. But if you were to leave your house, you went to your homegirl's house, you know, you went to a restaurant for whatever reason, went to a bar, you know, you took a trip from here, drove a few hours and went somewhere for the weekend and came back. If you was to check your IP address before all of that and then check it afterwards once you got back to your house, chances are you would have a different IP address. It changed. It's dynamic that way. Now, the second set of circumstances, or the second circumstance that an IP address will be dynamic and change, is that you can stay in the same location, but let's say for whatever reason, maybe you're having networking issues, your network is suddenly starting to move slow. If you were watching videos through a streaming platform and then all of a sudden it was working smooth and then all of a sudden it just started slowing down, you may have the idea of disconnecting from your Wi-Fi and then reconnecting. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. But the main point here is if you were to check your IP before you disconnected from your Wi-Fi, give it like 5 minutes for the sake of argument, and then reconnect after the fact, chances are you'll have a different IP address there. So those are the two main circumstances that I want to bring up. Your IP address can be dynamic and will change. One, if you change locations, including by going to someone else's house and connecting to their Wi-Fi, the IP address will be different on your phone or your device. Or if you stay at home, but if you continuously disconnect from your Wi-Fi, reconnect, disconnect, reconnect, chances are every time you reconnect, you'll have a different IP address every single time. Now, I do want to throw in this quick little detail, this quick little tidbit. All devices are set to default, or rather are set to dynamic by default. Now, settings, your computer's network settings, whatever it is, you may see static, and then you may see DHCP. DHCP is the same thing as dynamic. Dynamic is actually short for DHCP. The entire name is Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. This is the protocol that every single time a device that can connect to the internet connects to the internet through Wi-Fi and stuff like that. This is kind of like that teacher or, you know, just that person in school that would hand out your student IDs, you know, stuff like that. And you're not supposed to lose it, that whole thing, because it verifies your identity. You know, you can also apply this to like your passports or your driver's licenses, that whole thing. But either way, DHCP is like that big bad person with authority that gives you a way to identify yourself so that people ask for proof of who you are, you can just show them. It's like that. The thing is, DHCP comes into action every single time you connect to a different network or even your own network. So imagine like if you were in high school and you had a student ID, every single time that you left school and then would go back the next day, you got a different student ID. Every single time you left college or like you left for seasonal breaks and then you'd go back, every single time you went back, you would have to get a different student ID, right? Because you disconnected for a time. You left the area for a time and now you're back, but now you need another student ID to prove you are who you say you are, or to just give you a valid identity. That's what DHCP does. It's responsible for giving you that IP address or that way of identifying yourself every single time you connect to either your own network multiple times or to somebody else's whenever you leave home and then come back home. But even then, the cycle rinses and repeats. So I just want to do a quick recap. We just quickly went over the two main types of IP addresses. The first one was the easy one called static IP addresses, which are ones that you can preset and program into your device, and they will never change no matter where you go, no matter how many times you disconnect and reconnect from your personal network, all that stuff. Until you choose to change it back to DHCP or to dynamic, the static IP address will stay the same. But for security and other reasons, this usually doesn't apply to people's personal lives. That, and most people don't know what this is. This usually applies to, you know, businesses because they have actual operational reasons to make an IP address static because it makes their lives easier in terms of their work. In terms of your personal life, this really shouldn't matter. The second one is dynamic, or DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, which is a very fundamental protocol that you want to learn, especially if you want to go into cybersecurity, if you're studying for the Security Plus and stuff like that. You definitely want to touch on that. This is the type of IP address that even if you stay at home but you disconnect from your personal Wi-Fi, or every time you leave home and you connect to someone else's Wi-Fi and then you come back and reconnect to yours and all that stuff, every single time you reconnect to some network, you know, somewhere, DHCP is basically that person that gives you a brand new ID card every time, a new license, a new passport, all that stuff. Every single time you disconnect from a network and connect to some other one, including your own, you get a new ID card every single time. And again, imagine you going back to high school and you had a school ID, and every single day when you would leave the campgrounds, the campus grounds or the school grounds, went home, and then you had to go back to high school the next day, then every single day you would get a brand new student ID, because that's how DHCP works. Every time you disconnect, but you reconnect, even if it's the same place every day, even if it's your personal network every day, if you disconnect, that basically is you throwing your old ID away, and every single day you go back, you need to get a new one. And there are pros and cons to both dynamic and static IPs. That just goes for everything in tech and just really everything in life. So may not even have to keep saying that, but you know, those are the basic, you know, groups of IP addresses and what they're used for. Static IPs, again, are used mainly for professional reasons on a regular, every day-to-day basis. Unless you're just that paranoid or you're just that well-versed in tech, there's really no reason to make your personal devices static IPs. If anything, it may hurt you. So I'll go ahead and leave this video off here, guys. If you have any comments, questions, just feedback in general for me, go ahead and share that with me in the comment section below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.